Nadine has an envelope somewhere right there-ish, yes. And inside that envelope is a question that she has not yet seen because there were several things in there. And the spirit of the ultimate question, this space is completely dictated by the question itself. And what I mean by that is Nadine and I had a conversation a few weeks ago, and I asked her if she wanted to share this space with me, and you said yes. Uh,
I
and
consented.
yeah, yes, right. Because of course she didn't know what that really meant, because the next step was for me to see if a question emerged, which it did very quickly. And I wrote that question down, sent it to her in an envelope, and she has not yet seen it, but that's how we're going to begin our conversation today. And what's interesting about Nadine's question is it's not really a question, but all of that will make sense here in a few minutes. Nadine, I'd love for you to introduce yourself by saying, I don't know, 1 to 2 things that are surprising about you.
Sure, absolutely. Well, first of all, I'm Nadine Heir, and I'm so grateful to be here because I've watched a lot of these Ultimate Question episodes, and they're always really interesting. They're all different. They're all really exciting. So for me, just to be here is an honor, and I'm very excited, and I'm a little bit nervous about what the question, not question, is. I'll share something about me for those of you who don't know me. I am a copywriter, and I got my start or my first jobs in editorial writing car reviews. So I don't do that now anymore, but I used to drive cars and write about them for all sorts of brands. You know, everything from Mercedes to Subaru, all of them. So that was how I got my start in editorial. And another fact that I don't think many people know about me, my least favorite thing to do, my least favorite hobby is jeans shopping for jeans, which I don't know, I think a lot of women can probably relate to, but that's like my least favorite thing, but we need to do it sometimes. Versus what is my actual favorite hobby is shopping for cat toys that my cats will never use. So there's a collection there, and honestly, this is the best toy you can buy. But I do love buying them other things.
I absolutely love that. Well, thank you for that. And I was thinking, like, what are mine to share here? Let me know if you want to keep hearing my odd things about me. You can put that in the comments, and also feel free to say hi. I see some of you that are saying hi already. Thank you, because we don't really know if you're here until we see your comments. 2 odd things about me. I'm really into neon colors right now, which isn't really that odd based on what I'm wearing. So that was kind of cheating. Oh, yeah. See, all of the neon colors of your envelopes. And the other thing is, I'll show you something on my desk. It's this little guy that my sister gave to me so that I would never have coffee alone, which I think is really
Oh, that's adorable.
cool. And cats for both of us, you and me,
Of
because we
course,
love
I
our
know.
kitties.
I can only attract cat people now. Like if somebody tells me they don't like cats, I'm like, oh, we can't talk then because we'll have nothing to talk about.
Yeah,
That's
right.
not true. That's not true.
But I understand what you're saying. It's a very serious thing. Well, great. So you know a little bit about us, and what I want you, and I'm really speaking to the audience here because Nadine and I are about to dive into a conversation and we'll just be there. And so I want to invite you into that space in 2 ways. One, the ultimate question is all about creating a realness, and you might really vibe with the question and you might not. And if you don't vibe with it, that's okay. Still stick around for the realness that that you and I are already starting to tap into.
Mhm.
So that's my wish for everyone here. And without further ado, Nadine, let's dive in and open your envelope.
Okay, so I know this is the wrong way around for everyone because I need to look at my video mirrored because otherwise my face looks bizarre. So lovely little seal here, which I'm going to break. I haven't broken. I actually got this delivered to me while I was in England visiting my parents because Elayna's in Germany, and that seemed easier.
Yeah.
So this is my question, and I have managed to bring it all across the world without opening it. Okay, it's not a question.
But do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's hard. This is going to be really hard to answer. Do you want me to read it out?
Yeah.
It says, tell us about home. And home is underlined. Yeah, so maybe a bit of backstory for everyone. I'm from England. I was born in England. I lived there until I was an adult, and then I moved to Mexico after graduating. But I'd also already lived in Spain and France, so basically, I just didn't feel at home in England. And there were things that I didn't like about it, like the short winters and things like this. But also, mainly, it was after the 2008 credit crunch, we called it, so the economic crash. And there just weren't many jobs around for people that had no experience besides waitressing. For me, it was an opportunity to go abroad to do an internship in Mexico. And that's why I'm here. So when Elayna said, "What do you think your question is going to be?" I said, I wonder if it'll be about migration." And she said nothing to me.
No, I did not, because you were right.
Because I could see that was something we had in common, because you're also a migrant, Elayna.
Yeah. Yes, I'm here in Berlin. I'm from the States, but I've lived the majority of my adult life outside of the States. So it is always something that and this is different because usually the ultimate question isn't about the conversation that I want to have. It's really about the question or the non-question in this case. But this one just felt so right. And it's also been a conversation that I've really just wanted to have with you.
I can see why, because this is a tough, like, it's a tough thing to talk about. And well, let's see where it goes. So I'll start off with saying that it's not that England isn't home, but perhaps the more I'm away from England, the more I realize um, how ingrained in me it is, and things that I can't not do. No, so while I'm here, there'll be things like, we love to queue in England. We always make this joke. I was even at Heathrow last week, and there was a lady trying to skip the queue, and I was waiting to get my bloody little box to put all my stuff in and then take all my items out so people can see my whole life on a scanner. And there was a woman trying to jump the queue. She was obviously in a rush. And then, but nobody was letting her past. And then when it got to my turn, she wound her way up through the queue to get just behind me. And it got to my turn to stand in the scanning thing where you put your arms out and they check if you've got any guns on you. And she was like on top of the person who was already in the scanner. And they were like, "You have to get out, because if you're like getting that close, we can't actually scan the other person." And I was next in line, so I was standing a good like 2 yards away from it, which would be normal in England to be like at least a meter away. In Mexico, when we queue, when we stand in line, we like to be people like to be like this close to you. So you're like in the supermarket with somebody's head literally in your face. For me, that's not very comfortable, but we do like to stand in line. And the guy said to her, the I don't know what they're called, the person working at the airport, said to her, like, "You have to go and stand behind. There's a line, there's a queue." And she was not getting it. Obviously, English wasn't her first language. And he was like, "You have to stand, look behind you. There's a queue." And when she got it, he goes, "You have to stand in line. We love queuing in England. It's our hobby." And I was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Yeah, it is a hobby. We do like to do this."
So
It made it this whole thing.
that's like one of the first things that says welcome home to you is,
Welcome home, standing in a queue.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, literally at migration, standing in a queue is the first
yeah.
thing. But I suppose I can do that in Mexico as well when I get through migration. And on the contrary, the first queue I stood in when I arrived in Mexico this time, after just visiting my parents, was straight to migration. And I normally choose the line that's either foreigners or Mexicans, depending on which one is shorter, because I have a permanent residency card, so I can go through the Mexican line, but also I'm a foreigner, so I go through the foreigners line. But this time there was someone standing there to tell me what to do. And he sent me to the Mexican one. So now I know that actually I have to go through the Mexican one. I can't be the foreigners, even though I don't have Mexican nationality.
Oh,
So that for me, I was like, "Oh, but the other line is shorter. Can I not? Are you sure you don't want me to go through that line?" It's like, "No, permanent residents have to go through the Mexico line."
wow,
So yeah.
interesting. Well, just to think about that idea of like residency and home being imposed upon you,
Mm.
that carries a lot of weight.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
it carries a lot of weight, because sometimes that line is a lot longer, and I thought, okay, so this is like inconvenient but also emotionally impactful.
yeah,
Um, and strange, because if you ask the majority of Mexicans, although there are people who look like me in Mexico, there's not a lot of us. And people tend to assume I'm not from here. So people look, and it's not even just the way I look, also it's my tone of voice. So even when I speak in Spanish with I'm told a perfect accent. I still have a tone of voice that's from England, and
Mm.
this is something that I can tell. I live in a block of flats, and on the bottom floor there's a patio, so the people at the bottom have a patio, and if they sit outside and talk in there, it echoes all the way up here, and we can hear word for word everything that they're saying. And sometimes they have very important business calls, and I've had to say to them, if you don't want any of us knowing what you're saying, you can't sit there because we can hear everything. And we had a British couple, or it was an Australian and a British couple, living there for about a year, and I knew that he was British because of his tone of voice. I could just tell. I couldn't hear all the time what he was saying in the corridors and stuff like that, but I knew from his tone of voice that he was English.
Yeah, interesting. I've never thought about the difference between tone and accent. We usually just kind of lump those two things together.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. It
yeah,
is. Yeah, I think maybe only one taxi driver has pointed it out to me. The majority of people, they're like, "Well, you're not from here, are you?" No, well, or normally I don't like answering this question because I get it so much and it gets kind of tiring to always answer the same
yeah.
question. Oh, where are you from? England. Oh, okay, it rains a lot there, doesn't it? I'm like, yes, there are. Yes, I'm gonna have this conversation all over again. And so I normally try and brush them off and not really answer it. But this time he said, I can tell you're not from here because of your tone of voice.
Mm,
Normally people tell me I have an accent, even though I think I don't, or people tell me I don't. But I think that was actually, I was like, yeah, because I don't think I can change that very easily.
yeah, interesting. That's really interesting.
Do you speak German? Do you speak in a different,
I don't speak German, which is like a very
not anything?
I mean, I understand quite a bit and I can get
Yeah.
around with like ordering coffees and that kind of
Yeah,
thing,
yeah,
but
yeah.
all of my relationships and friendships and stuff are in English, which is a very sore spot for me actually, because my first experience really living abroad was in Japan, and I
Mm,
lived in the middle of nowhere to the point where if I didn't learn the language, I would be completely isolated.
isolated.
Even the woman that I was teaching English with. She was the Japanese teacher of English. I had a really hard time communicating with her. That was her level of English. She had a really hard time understanding me. But it's also become, I love how we're talking about language. I just want to, for anybody who's, the question was, and I realized I should put it up here for us in the future. The question was, which is not a question, tell me about home. And right now, Nadine and I are talking about language, and I'm sure that we will loop that back because for me, this is such a huge piece of
Mhm.
this question in general. But yeah, it's been really hard for me. I mean, two things about being here is one, Berlin is the worst city to learn German in because
Yeah,
everybody speaks English and it's
yeah.
incredibly international. Um, and it's also really difficult or confusing, I would say, for me to figure out where I fit in isn't really even it. I don't really, I'm used to being in foreign contexts where I don't look like people.
Mm.
And I'm more comfortable with that than I am looking like the people of the native or, like I look like people think I'm German until I open my mouth.
Which can be problematic because when they start asking you for directions and you're like, I'm sorry to have swindled you into thinking. I get people asking me for directions here as much as I think I don't look like I'm from here, or people tell me I don't. I get a lot of people asking me for directions.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, I'm so complimented that you think I live
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I
it is weird when you're used to, as you say, used to being the odd one out.
well, and it just it makes it clear for everybody right away.
Mm.
And I've spent so many years in that. I was in Japan for 5 years total, and I just that's what is more comfortable for me now. And I think a huge piece of the reason that it's less comfortable for me here is because I don't speak the language, and that is a really sore spot in me. And I can tell you all the reasons that I don't. And they're not excuses. There, it's I've really worked with myself on why I don't, and not treating it as excuses, but just understanding the circumstances, first COVID and building a business. And then I
Mm.
was in the States for a year and a half, and I've been back for about a year. And I'm amazed at in the last year how my German has improved, largely in listening comprehension. But anyway, I want to get back to this.
There's a jump there though, like the
Oh,
listening comprehension, it goes and then suddenly you hit it with the communication, with
yeah,
the what's the word for it, like speaking and writing, the
yeah,
output. So you will hit like No, cat hair. Sorry, of course, because that's on brand for me. So you will hit a point where it suddenly clicks and everything works. But yeah, it's language is a huge part of identity. It's a huge part
Yeah.
of identity. And I don't think you know this about me, Elayna, but I studied languages at university. But really, my degree, actually learning the language was a really small part of it. Most of my classes were in English, and I wrote most of my papers in English, which might give you a little guide as to why I do a lot of organic marketing and especially the writing part. So, and we did things like history, socioeconomics, politics, all of the things that make a country what it is. So while I was studying French, I was studying the French Revolution probably more than I was studying the French language, and I was studying the countries that were in our colonies of France and how that happened and the migration back into France, and the same for Spain. So I was studying the native languages here in Mexico. That's Nahuatl and Mayan, for example, are still, like, I don't want to say widely spoken, but there are still people alive who speak it. And we were studying those before we were doing the language. So that proves to you how much language does speak to the identity of a people. And I think it's crucial. For me, that's why I really wanted to dominate the language.
Yeah.
Like, I really wanted to be able to do it really well, because for me, that was respectful and it's all part of assimilating. So if
Yeah.
I didn't, now when people say to me, "Oh, you speak such good Spanish," and I always say in Spanish, "Más me vale." It's like, well, yeah, as I should. Like, like, can you imagine if I didn't? I work in Mexico. A lot of my clients are in Mexico, or in Latin America, and I live here. But I did also have this experience when we just went to Lisbon. And Amsterdam, of course, as well, where I do not speak Portuguese or Dutch, but I can get out the odd word. But everyone speaks English, and Berlin is the same. I went to Berlin, and every time I was like practicing my German, people were like, "Oh, you're English?
Yeah.
You can't practice. You can't learn it there."
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and yeah, there's so much to say about Berlin with that, but I want to, I'm curious,
Okay.
when you when I ask you, I'm gonna switch the question up a little bit. What is home to you?
What is home? I'm trying not to answer with a cliche, like home is where the heart is, or these things. I think home is there is a sense of belonging, and the reason I know this is because I've done a lot of work on this for myself,
Yeah.
and that belonging is something that's really important to me, and that's why assimilation was so important to me. And I probably should have chosen a different country to move to if I was wanting to assimilate, because in Germany or in Holland, probably I wouldn't be so weird. Um, Here, I have tried very hard to belong, and it wasn't until maybe so I've been here 14 years now. Like, I've been here a long time, and I've never well, I'm trying to, like, what do I tell you? So I've never actually naturalized. I've never taken Mexican nationality because it doesn't make a lot of sense for me, sort of politically and legally, because it would need to be renewed. And if I left the country and I came back, it would be more complicated than just having the permanent residency. Now that I have the permanent residency, I can just have that there, basically. So that's why I haven't naturalized. But also because I feel like I'm not Mexican, but I do want to feel like I belong here. And somebody told me recently, "Well, Nadine, but you're doing like neighborhood, like, I guess, like neighborhood watch sort of work." I've been working or trying to help some of the migrants here that are from Haiti and Venezuela, and probably that will increase given recent news, who have been literally camping on the street here in my neighborhood. It's been horrific. So a lot of the local, well, a few of the local neighbors have been campaigning to try and get the government to sort that out. They have now put these people in shelters. It's a long story. If anyone's interested to read about that, there is a page on my Substack about it, or just DM me. But somebody said to me, like, "You're doing all these efforts, you're the committee on your building, you belong, you're putting enough into the community to be able to feel like you belong here." But I personally, this is very vulnerable, I don't feel like I don't feel entitled to it. I don't feel like I'm owed it,
Mm.
the belonging. So that's hard for me. That's hard for me to actually recognize. And I have no way to deal with it besides just hoping that eventually it either doesn't matter or my brain recognizes that it's fine.
Yeah. Well, the language that you chose around that is, um Like, I'm really leaning into that in terms of I think you said entitled, right? Like, you don't feel entitled to it.
Yeah.
Um,
Like you have to earn it. But that's silly, right? You don't have to earn it. You belong because you belong, right? So,
yeah, but I think it's interesting now to look at the beginning of our conversation around
mm,
specifically language and how that is going to be an immediate divide in both of our experiences. And nationality now another piece of this, and then the word migrant as well. Like all of these things are kind of leading to this idea of how do we how do we really just sort through the shit that is the world. I mean, there's
stop
all of
watching the news, I would say.
yeah,
That's probably the fastest way to solve it.
I mean, there and I kinda don't like that I use shit and world at the same time. I'm really trying to separate the idea that it's more society than it is the world, because the world knows what to do. I really believe
I
that,
see.
and I think that we need to kind of expand the way that we talk about it. So, I'm recanting that.
Self-editing.
Yeah, but, yeah, just what else can you share about that feeling of
Mhm.
not being entitled to it? Where is that in you?
I feel like I'm talking to my therapist, and that's fine.
Um,
I think no, I think it's good because to go deep in this and actually to let other people see it. I recognize that this is a small percentage of the population that can really relate to this. But even some people that are watching this now, they've maybe been stationed somewhere else. They've had to go like for a military service or whatever. So I think a lot of us, even if it's been a couple of months, can relate to that sense of not belonging somewhere but wanting to.
yeah.
For me, to talk specifically as well about home as a part of your identity, I think it is crucial for a lot of us to understand, to assimilate it as a part of your identity. And that's why I talk about being a migrant. I don't talk about being an expat because I'm not an expat. So brief explanation for me and for majority of dictionaries, an expat is somebody who was paid to come out to a country. So you had a good job maybe, and the country said, we'll send you out to this other country so you can train all these other people to do the same thing as you do, and we'll, I don't know, put your kids up in private schools, and your spouse will be given a maintenance fee, and or maintenance fee like an allowance. We'll organize your house for you. I didn't have any of that. I came with like a job offer, and that was it. And very poor pay. I will say now, looking back on it, it was incredibly poor pay. So I don't identify an expat because that was never my experience. But a lot of people who come here as migrants like me identify as expats because migrant has negative connotations to it. But I am a migrant, I'm an immigrant. In England, that would mean you're from Eastern Europe or you're from Southeast Asia, and therefore less than or whatever to certain people, depending on your political leanings. So people don't like to use that word immigrant. And I think probably, especially living in Mexico, I'm very aware that an immigrant in the US is a Mexican, even if they're from anywhere in Latin America.
Right.
Because of the shit show that is society, we've come to understand this term immigrant or migrant as a really negative connotation. So throwing a question out there, and this is like rhetorical, but do I need to belong? Do I need to be of the nationality to belong? Does it to be home? Should, like, does there need to be a nationality involved? I mean, can I be a migrant and can Mexico be home? I don't know. I'm not really sure that I can answer that, but maybe as we go through the conversation,
Yeah.
I'll get clarity.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think, and I wanna expand this for the people that are here a little bit because, uh, I know that we all have experienced times in our lives, whether you've grown up in the same place your entire life, of not knowing how you belong and not knowing how you
Mm,
fit in, and knowing that it's really only about convincing ourselves that we do. Um, but one of the things that I think is so interesting about this conversation is when I first moved to Japan, I didn't know anything about the culture or anything about the language. And I was there, I was also 22, so this is very in
mm,
line with that.
wow.
I was there to, I knew that I was trying to prove that I could do it. I was trying to prove that I knew the language. I was there was a sense of proving,
Mm,
which is again like a 22-year-old, right?
proving.
But when I then I went back to the States for 5 years, and then I went back to Japan for another 2. And this is key because when I went back the second time, I knew that I knew the language, I understood
Mm.
the culture, I knew how to fit in. So the question was, because I don't believe that home is about fitting in, right? It's the question was, how do I translate my heart in this?
Wow.
And that I don't know how I even, yeah, that was the question. So it was, what are the things that I am willing to hold back on because that will make it easier to fit in? Like, where is that appropriate for me to do so that
Mm.
is still in line? And where am I just not willing to sacrifice in the way that my 22-year-old self needed to be able to prove something? Um,
Yeah.
and a great example is how much I use my hands. You don't use your hands in Japan. And I also owned my, um, just the more of a theatrical way of being in front of the classroom. I was teaching English there. So
Right.
thinking about, to now go back to us and our conversation around assimilation, right? Because assimilation, there's all different levels of it, and it's really dictated upon, I believe, uh, ourselves in terms of what
Mm.
we expect of ourselves, which is, I mean, that's a whole nother, like, that's another ultimate question right there. What do you expect of yourself? But what about for you? Can you look back 14 years ago, and then like 10 years ago and 3 months ago, to look at what feels important and what's changed in terms of assimilation and fitting in?
Mm. Yeah, yeah, I can. I would link it perhaps to that I was diagnosed with general anxiety disorder while I was here, because a lot of things changed after that. COVID happened. There are a lot of different changes in me as a person and the way I interacted with people, because I did feel targeted here because I stood out so much. In my first years, I was not living in salubrious areas of the city. So here in the area I'm in, it's like kind of normal for people to be at Airbnbs, and people probably just see me as like yet another tourist. Whereas in the areas that I was in, they were not tourists. So I really stood out, and I would say, yeah, it was targeted in some upsetting ways, and I had to deal with that. And really, what it triggered was probably a disorder that I had for my whole life, which was generalized anxiety disorder. I would go to the gym in like a hoodie, like covered up in like the baggiest hoodie I had, baggy trousers, and then get changed at the gym, and put like my leggings and my sports top on. But on the way there, even here in what I would consider a nice neighborhood, I still felt this need to hide who I was, because I felt so like, if people could see my blue eyes, my red hair, how tall I was, people would, because I'm tall, people would, if they couldn't see my face, just refer to me as like sir, as like or young boy, which for me was like, great, cool. So that means I'm completely disguised. I got to the point where I was like, I'm pretty sure this is like a symptom, among other things, not sleeping, another major symptom. So I sought out, actually, I was going for maybe an ADHD or an autism diagnosis, and they were like, no, anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder. So for
Mm.
me now, how I show up, that I'm being cared for this, which is a whole other conversation. But I always talk about how much better access to healthcare I have here, especially going private, and how much more accessible it is compared to what you earn comparatively. I've done the maths, and even for the average Mexican, it's much more accessible to go private here than it is for the average English person. Um, it allowed me to show up in a way that would allow me to like wear colors, which, for example, we don't do in England as well. We're very somber usually in the way that we dress. Maybe people would wear like a nice bright blue or bright red, but not, I don't know, yellow, like the lovely top that you're wearing, for example. So to show up wearing colors, to walk out of the house wearing fashion that actually, yes, it drew more attention to me and I wasn't hiding as much, to walk down the street feeling confident. There was a large shift in my brain. And I think we could talk for hours about how the culture here of being very conservative in Mexico City, and also the conservative culture that I came from in England, how that interacted within my brain and affected what I consider like a comfortable place to be. Nonetheless, despite like this grave discomfort that I was going through, I still didn't want to move back to England. And that's why I hesitate to call England home. Although when people say to you, where's home? Are you going home? It's like, well, my parents don't live in my childhood home. The city, they don't even live in the town that I grew up in. So like going home. I spend a lot of time in London where my friends are, and being with them, I feel welcome. I'm part of their families, and that is really heartwarming for me. But then I feel that when I come here with my Mexican friends and they welcome me into their families and I'm part of it. But it's obviously taken me a lot longer to build that up
Yeah.
here as an outsider. And I think I went completely off track and didn't bother to answer your question, Elayna. If you can
I
steer
don't
me back.
I don't know if I remember what my question was. I think we were exactly where we needed to be with that, because I
Okay.
feel the same in terms of thinking about, I mean, when I talk about going back to the
You went
States,
to Japan. Oh yeah.
well, I usually will, I don't know, now I might actually consciously have changed it to I'm going back to the States instead of I'm going back home. Um, I I think I say going back to the States now. Uh,
Yeah.
and I'm going to Japan in October. I haven't been there since I left the last time because of COVID and everything else.
Mm,
And to me, that in some ways feels like the most home that I
mm,
have. Like the second time I went, I'd been through a really terrible breakup, and then all of a sudden I was in the middle of nowhere, alone in the mountains by a
mm.
river, just incredible solitude, and it was the most healing experience I think I've ever experienced in my life. Uh, and for those of you who might be wondering, well, what about your family? I'm incredibly close with my sister, and part of the reason that it's funny when you read that question, I had this feeling in my body. I was like, "Oh shoot, I did not think about saying this," because my mom died a year and a half ago, and so that was my childhood home. That
Yeah.
was like I'm from Michigan, but I've had family friends in Michigan, but that was home. That's when I would say I'm going back home. But that place doesn't exist anymore, and when I do go back to the States, I'm visiting my sister, that's her
Mm.
home. So the
Yeah.
last
Yeah.
time that I came back here, I realized on the plane over, and this just, like, completely slapped me in the face, like, this space that I'm in right now is the only home that I have,
Mm.
and I don't say that in a scarcity way, I say that in a realization that was like, "Holy shit." I would use
Yeah.
a different word if I wasn't live right now. Um, like, it yeah, like, I was always used to having 2 homes, and I'm using home in a very literal sense because we can
Yeah.
also talk about it in how we carry that in us, and home is where the heart is. I believe that so fully as well, but I think that that is such a conscious thing, and thinking about who we have around us, and
Mm.
um, we hear about that all the time in business, but I think that this question of home for people who move around the world, uh, who we have around us,
Matters.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I can absolutely relate. Not, of course, to your experience in Japan, because I don't think I've reached that level, to be honest. So kudos to you for reaching that. But as you say, like, you lose people at home, and that changes how you talk about it, and how we talk about things, for me, is really important, beyond how we actually what's going on inside. The words matter. So when you say I'm going back to the US, or I'm going home, or I'm going back home, even just that back, for me, I don't normally say I'm going back to England, because it's not back, it's not backwards for me at all.
mm,
But my parents are still around, and I think the only thing that really makes me like tear up, always, like, talking about, like, my parents and
yeah,
how long they'll be around with me and all the things that we've done and those experiences, they're so precious to me. Or my cats. I think, because as much as I love my partner and my friends, I feel like the people who are maybe a little bit more vulnerable, who you recognize that they might not be around the whole time that you're alive, for
yeah,
me, that's something much more poignant. But then when you lose those things, what happens then? When I was away, I was just thinking, oh well, this is perfect. It's lovely to be in England. I love England in summer, the long days, and love it. Um, However, of course, the cats, they don't know where I am, and I can't talk to them, and they have no idea. So I think that when you have a dependent in another country, that changes your sensation of being at home. When
mm,
you have somebody who literally raised you, like, your sister could up and visit you in Germany if she wanted to, if she had the means to do so. But as your parents get older, whenever my parents visit me, I'm aware that this is a trial. Like, this is
yeah,
not, it's not like me popping back to England. It's a real effort. And I think, well, I know that our family is such a huge part of home, Then if your family moves somewhere else, yeah, what does it matter? You start to realize, actually, I'm so at home in an airport, in an airline seat. Well, maybe not, because they're so small, but they feel so familiar that experience. I don't
Yeah,
have any flight anxiety. I've never had it because for me, this is just standard. This is super
right.
normal. This is how you get to places. And it was until like maybe the last couple of flights that I've taken, I thought, why are people afraid of flying? And then like we had a lot of turbulence, so much turbulence that they couldn't do the in-flight service because they kept coming out with the trolley and then having to go back and coming out and going back. The poor in-flight staff. And I was like, yeah, this is like a really precarious little vehicle. And I'd never really thought about it because it was just so normal. It is so normal. And perhaps now, I'm not saying this question doesn't matter, but this question is less impactful to me now of where is home than back when I first migrate. Like when I first lived in France, for example, I was just emailing my parents. That was all we had. We didn't have,
Yeah.
we couldn't SMS over between two different countries. And even though it was only like, I guess like an hour and a half away, it was in the Blue Coast, it was called, so the French Riviera, near Saint-Tropez, not very far. But the only way you could communicate was via emails. I didn't have my own computer. I didn't have emails on my smartphone. I had like, I don't know, something like the equivalent of the Nokia that survived everything. And I would have to use the company's computer that they had for the visitors, for the other tourists, to go in and send emails to my parents. And that was it. That was the only way I could communicate with them. Now I'm like, oh my God, this ultimate question was so impactful. I'm just going to call my mom quickly.
Yeah, yeah.
So I feel closer to home now than I did back then in that sense.
Yeah, that's a good point. I have trouble with the time difference, but
Oh,
that's
yeah.
another story.
I do
Um,
get the odd call at like 1 a.m. where people are like, oh, I forgot
yeah.
that you're not in England.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, as we begin to reach towards a close here, what's surfacing in you? Is there any other thoughts that you have around this idea, this
Hmm.
fake question, this non-question
The non question.
about home?
Let me tell you something that I think will be pertinent to you, Elayna, and anyone who's moved for a long period of time. Every time I go back to England, my friends say, when are you coming back? When are you going to move here? Because, and I've never said to them, I'm staying in Mexico. Mexico's a permanent change. Because if I did go back, maybe I think, well, maybe I wouldn't go back to England. I left for a reason. Maybe I would go closer to them to be within an hour and a half flight. Wouldn't mind living on the French Riviera. That was beautiful, but I'd have to recover all my French, and that would be a trial. All of these things that I think about, I have never committed. I have never said, yes, I'm coming back to England, or I plan to retire in England, or I plan to do this. And I wonder how that engages with our idea of settling down, the idea of getting a husband, getting the house, getting the kids. Um, I was not, we have a mortgage, but that was actually my partner's decision. I was never pushing to let's buy a house, let's buy a home. I think it's not been important to me to actually have those roots that so many people consider necessary now. That doesn't mean I'm not planning for the future in any way. Like
Right.
I hope to retire and I hope to be in good health and all of these things, but I haven't planned specifically to make a home, if that sense. I haven't, do you know what I haven't done? I haven't nested.
Yeah.
I haven't
In
nested in the way that other women do.
Yeah. I always do in my immediate space, like, you can see from my apartment, but I'm the same with you. I've never and this was one of my biggest difficulties when I started in entrepreneurship was I'd never planned out in my life, but I'd done all these things. So I was thinking, "Well, I've done all of these things, but I didn't have a plan for it, so why are you telling me that I won't be able to accomplish XYZ if I don't have a plan for it?" And I
Mm.
struggled with that a lot. Now I've really, that I've brought that into my process and the work that I do with my clients and all of that. But, I'm just like you, and of course, I am thinking about it a little bit differently as I think about a family, but I also understand that, I always do things kind of differently.
Mm.
So I don't know what it'll look like, and I don't think
And
I
why worry?
yeah,
I,
I
I
know
completely agree. We have this like you need to plan for the future mentality. And we hear it a lot, but it's all like the niche down, all of this advice that we get from the gurus. But I especially feel like, yes, you should plan for the future, but there's so many things that could happen. If I think of, like, the credit crunch, it like destroyed my dad's pension and things like this. So much as you can plan for the future, things happen that change realistically. I could tomorrow be diagnosed with something like ME, and that would change entirely my outlook. I
Mhm.
know that happened to somebody who then moved back to their country because they did have public health care that was much more accessible for them there, and that changes your entire life, outlook on life.
Yeah.
So illnesses, money, family, all of these things could impact what home looks like tomorrow and how we feel about it. But until then, I don't know. Yeah, why buy into this? Oh, you have to have everything planned out, because
Yeah.
realistically, I've lived so much. There was certainly not a plan to stay in Mexico. That was never the plan. It's
Right.
not even the plan for the next 12 months. It's
Yeah.
just kind of happening.
Yeah. Yeah. My plan is not to stay in Berlin, but who knows how long I'll be here, so, uh
It's not the plan. Move somewhere that maybe they will let you learn German. Would
Right.
be
Yeah, well, I want the I've got a surfboard back here. I'm ready for the ocean, but that's still gonna be a few years, I think, which is,
Oh,
I'll be surfing.
I was in Lisbon and there were some beautiful beaches there that you could surf on with,
Yeah.
like, they had one that they said was something like 50, 60 foot waves.
Nazare?
So, like, pretty, I
Yeah.
can't remember.
I
I
I
probably
know.
am
Yeah,
awful with names. Yeah, that one. Yeah, not too far from you. There's some good spots, but I suppose in Berlin, not so much.
not so much. But, well, Nadine, thank you so much. As we close, I always like to ask, is there a question that has emerged for you that you'd like us to take with us as we go into the rest of our day?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I would like everyone to think about and maybe comment to me as well, or send a DM, or put it on under this event, and so that Elayna and I can see it. Is, do we need to decide?
Hmm.
Do we even need to decide? I'm curious, because I think that there's an argument for both sides, and I could play devil's advocate, but I'm not going to. I'd be really curious to see what
Yeah,
people say about that.
that's beautiful. I love that. I love that. Well, thank you so much,
You
and
inspired it.
for every well, it's been an honor. For those of you who are new to Nadine, please connect with her further via her Substack, which you can find here. We'll also drop links and stuff below, however you're viewing us. And thank you, Nadine, so much for being here. And if you'd like to connect with me further, I have a newsletter. It's called The Reframe. You can get it at thereframenewsletter.com. And if you've enjoyed this or want to see more or review this conversation, head over to the Ultimate Question Library, which is at theultimatequestion.live. So thank you so much. There was a lot of comments here, and I was kind of looking at them here as well. Thank you for being here, because your energy was really potent. We could feel it, and you were part of this conversation, even if we might not have pulled comments into the front for everyone to see here. So thank you all. Thank you, Nadine. Beautiful
Thank
conversation.
you, Elayna. This
Yeah.
is really moving for me. Thank you for setting it up. Thank you, and I'm very excited to continue this afterwards. But beautiful, just wonderful conversation. Thank you so much. And again, thank you to everyone for being here. We felt you.